we're going to take a little break away from the shuffle that we've been learning so far, and we're going to transition to chords, because we've been calling it A and D and E, and we've been doing the fifths, which doesn't really have a particular sound like a minor or a major or a 7. So now we're going to bring some fully fledged chords into the mix and see what that's like to play it. And you'll see that this offers a whole world of variety that can then be mixed in at a later date. Let me give you a little preview. Chord, back to the shuffle. Chord, chord, shuffle. Chord. So there's a little example of how we can mix the two things that we're learning right now. So we've done the shuffle to a certain degree, and now we're going to have a look at chords. So what I want you to focus on in this course are dominant 7th chords. I'm not going to go into the theory too much here, but there are major 7 chords, minor 7 chords, and the dominant 7 chords, or sometimes they're just called 7 chords. So we're going to play A7, D7, and E7. Now you may already know these from your experience with guitar so far, but they're relatively easy chords down in first position, and I'll go over them briefly now. So A7 is going to be open 5th string, 2nd finger on the E on the 2nd fret of the 4th string, 3rd string open, that's a G, and then your 3rd finger on C sharp. Now you can really tuck up the fingers right up against the frets there so there's no buzzing, and that's our chord. From there, to transition to a D7 chord is really quite a nice jump. Sometimes chords just feel nice to transition because we get to keep similar shapes. So have a look at fingers 2 and 3 here. They just have to travel across one string, keeping the same gap between them. And we're going to add in the 1st finger here on the 1st fret of the 2nd string. So D7 is open 4th string, 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string, 1st finger on the 1st fret of the 2nd string, and 3rd finger on the 2nd fret of the 1st string. That's a D7. So you can see the transition from A7 to D7. One of the key things here is really to make sure that when you're playing the strings, you play only the strings that are in the chord. If you try and play all 6 strings all the time, it will sound muddy like this. It doesn't sound too terrible, to be honest, but it does sound muddy because you've got this E down here, which definitely doesn't belong in the D7 chord. So try and control your right hand so that it just strums the strings that we're using in the chord. And speaking of that, E7 is a very forgiving chord because we're using all 6 strings in terms of strumming. So we're going to use our 2nd finger. Well, we start with the open 6th string. Our 2nd finger goes on the 2nd fret of the 5th string, 4th string is open, and the 1st finger goes on the 1st fret of the 3rd string. So those 2 fingers there. And the trick with this one really is that you want to hear that D string ring. That's the D, and that's what gives it the color of a 7. So you want to make sure that you're not touching. Sometimes it's very easy to touch the string with the pad of your 2nd finger. So make sure you play that string open when you're holding down the chord, just to make sure that you can really hear it well. That's an E7. Now if you want to add one little piece of flavor to that chord, you can also add your 4th finger, your pinky, on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. That also works with the E7 chord. Gives it extra flavor. So if we were to do a right hand strumming pattern with this, we might simply start with just downstrokes. So let's do a one round of the 12-bar blues, finishing on A, and we'll do it with A7, D7, and E7. Starting on A7. 1, 2, down strums, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. D7, back to A7, E7, D7, and we'll finish on A. So that is simple, a simple downward strum. Now we can also put in our shuffle rhythm here as well. So let's try that. We're going to do our shuffle rhythm with the triplets throughout the progression, just with down strums. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, D, back to A, E7, D7, so that's going to be your challenge now, is to play through the progression with those lovely ringing 7 chords. Now you might be wondering, what about major chords or minor chords or what have you? And yes, they do work. They just sound a little different. And once we get more comfortable with all of this, we can start mixing and matching between them. So for instance, we could do something like A major. It doesn't have as bluesy of a sound. But we could do this. A7. So we could start messing around with switching between major and dominant 7. But for now, we're going to stick just with the 7 chords because it's more important to get the feel and the rhythm and the familiarity with this process. So that's your challenge, is to do down strums on the beats through the progression, as well as triplet shuffles with strums.